All right, welcome back. This is the Something Adventure podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Joe Hudson. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Thanks so much.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this. So I'll describe Joe maybe not in the normal way. I describe people by their resumes. I have a lot of pretty famous people on this, well, famous Silicon Valley people on this podcast, and wildly successful. And a number of them have said to me, there's a guy. And I was like, what do you mean there's a guy? What are you talking about? I was like, oh, like I wouldn't be this successful if it wasn't for this guy. And you should talk to this guy. Like, what is a guy? The guy is you, Joe Hudson. I'm like, what is he, like a 1950s movie star? Like name like Joe Hudson? They're like, no, he's a coach. We'll figure out what term you use for that. But Joe is founder and I guess leader of The Art of Accomplishment, which is his business, also the name of the podcast. So welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, a total pleasure. Yeah, coach is fine. I mean, you can call me lots of titles. I don't really disregard any of them. So yeah, any of it works.
Josh Felser said you might not love the title guru.
Okay, he's got a point. He's got a good point there.
Of all the titles.
Yeah, I'll take it for a very short period of time until somebody can see the guru in themselves. But even that, it bothers me. Yeah.
Well, before we get to your not being a guru, how does this all start for you? Like, how does because you started your career, a lot of people, their career was like they were, I don't know, they worked as an engineer at Facebook. This is a very logical path. Mm-hmm. You started somewhere else. You were a venture capitalist at some point. Do I have that right?
It's crazier than that. Let's see. I'll do it really briefly, but it's kind of cool. I got out of college. I threw fish in Alaska. I taught Head Start in the Hayes Valley projects in San Francisco. I did international stock lending. And then I did big real estate lending. I did movie direct. I directed some movies, short films, and television for a bit. And then I did some interstitial stuff, like little consulting work, while I did a tremendous amount of meditating, and then venture capital and philanthropy, and now coach.
Wait, now how does this get started? You come out of college.
Yeah, right.
We don't need to dwell on this, but I'm curious.
Yeah.
You come out of college. What Ken? What are you thinking? Like, are you?
I left college and I was thinking, literally, I just read a book called Black Elk Speaks by Black Elk Speaks by Black Elk, and he talked about the sun dance, which is a ritual where you allow and invite pain into your world, and from the Lakota Indian. And I was like, I need to do that because I've been in this ivory tower. I got kicked out of my first college. In my second college, I graduated valedictorian, and I was in this ivory tower, and so I just was like, I need something real world. And I needed money. So what I did was I went to Alaska and I butchered fish for a season. So and I wasn't thinking about long-term future. I've always kind of thought about happiness not as a dollar in the bank account or something that I've achieved. It's a way of being. Yeah.
And you managed not to get pushed off the fishing boat.
I
have a friend who did that a few summers, and he was like, "Yeah, justice can be pretty weird up there. Like,
it's no joke.
It's a little more dangerous than you might think."
Yeah.
Where does the meditation? I grew up in a kind of new age family in the 70s and 80s, so we were meditating like as kids before it was cool. Yeah. Like, how does that come into your?
Yeah, so I meet my wife. My wife is like, "Hey, there's a couple of things that we need to do if we're going to get married. One of them is travel in a third world country for 6 months, and another one is do a 10-day silent retreat." Wow. I was intrigued by the retreat anyways, not for the meditation, but just like, could I be in silence for 10 days? Can I do that?
Yeah.
I didn't know that was the easy part. the 14 hours of sitting a day, that was the tough part.
Right.
And so my first meditation was a 10-day silent retreat. And on day 3 of that meditation, it was a Vipassana, kind of a traditional Myanmar Burmese kind of Vipassana. And on the third day, I had this, what I call it is like God's little heroin high. I had like this experience of oneness that lasted 8 seconds. And then that really drove the journey. I was just like, whatever the hell that is, I want that again.
Yeah.
So then I unfortunately, I attacked it the way that I attacked business, which is not the most efficient way to attack that.
Right, right.
And so it like led to like a tremendous amount of work and exploration.
This is like not thinking about an elephant, like trying to get back to that place.
That's
Like,
yeah, exactly.
like the more
And
you try, you just
yeah,
you,
instead of realizing that you're already there. Yeah,
yeah.
that one. Yeah,
And
exactly.
was this like a guided kind of meditation thing, or just like
Uh,
silence and you'll find it?
no, it
Uh,
was, unfortunately, it was, fortunately and unfortunately, it was a guided thing. It was, I think the website used to be dhamma.org or something like that, but it was, at the time, it was free, which was important to me.
yeah, sure.
And so I didn't really look into how they did it. And like when I meditate now, it's nothing like what I medit like that meditation style or technique. As a matter of fact, I think that the idea of what I was doing back then was I was trying to manage my experience through meditation, which I would argue is the opposite of meditation.
Interesting.
Meditation is actually the full acceptance of the experience as it is. And and so a lot of people use meditation to manage their emotional states, or use it to manage the way they react to things. And I think that's torture. It's not really
Do you think that's what
meditation.
is that what a lot of people in it's become, I think, fairly popular in
Pretty,
Silicon Valley. I don't
not quite as much as hallucinogenic drugs, but pretty popular. Yeah.
right. Take the easy way out.
Mm.
That seems crazy to me, by the way. Like try to manage doses of like, God bless people for doing it, but wow, that seems crazy. Or just take the just take the
Yeah,
drug and go to the
I
desert.
think there's a natural tendency. Like I think that there's like, as we develop as humans, there's ways that you approach meditation, and meditation helps accelerate that. So it makes total sense to get into meditation for that reason. A lot of people come to it to learn to manage their stress, but it's somewhere along the journey, hopefully you realize that it's not about managing the stress. It's about accepting where you are, how you are, and learning to observe it and see the patterns in it, but not through trying, through literally not managing anything. What
Right.
is it like to sit still and not manage anything?
Yeah. And it just, as I understand, well, nothing about meditation, but it just is a thing, right? It's not like a religious, it's like people who do yoga and they're very into kind of the sort of religious and spirituality of it, but you go back and it was just like, it wasn't what it was. It was just this thing that people in India did that was just like, was like
Yeah,
exercise.
I think
You know?
it's like Christianity, right? There's like, what is Christianity? There's so many forms of it. I think it's the same thing. Some people take their meditation very personally, and it becomes dogmatic,
Right.
and it becomes its own trap. And some people see meditation as just a beautiful experiment in which they're learning.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of different approaches. And I think that's one of the things that people miss a lot is people are very concerned with what am I doing instead of how am I approaching it? How am I approaching what I'm doing? They're more concerned as should I meditate or not meditate rather than what's the approach to the meditation.
And so when in the course, well, first of all, how do you become a venture capitalist out of the from on a fishing last see you on a fishing boat?
Yeah, right. That was a crazy one. So I was doing video, I was doing the Hollywood thing, and a wealthy, I did international stock lending before that. So I'm
Mhm.
always interested in the financial markets. It's always been an exciting thing for me. And I had this video art installation that a very wealthy man asked me to do. And so I did it. And in that conversation, this was back when gold was really cheap and oil was really cheap, and before the big collapse. And I was like, oh, this is how I see the markets moving. He invested, he made a lot of money in our side conversations. And then he asked me to come and work for him. And
Wow.
I said, no, I'm doing this art. I really love it. And he's like, well, what would it need to look like for you to come and work with me? And I said, well, the things I'm interested, I thought about that for 2 months, by the way.
Yeah.
And then I said, the things I'm interested in are, um, one is consciousness on the planet, because I see that as the root cause of most of our issues. It's not like, if you just keep on going back, it's like, how do we look at things is more important than even, I would say, the environment. Because like, if you look at things differently, your environmental actions change. So I'm interested in that. And I'm interested in environmentalism. At the time, I was very interested in it. And so I thought to myself, well, what's the biggest change agent of technology and behavior on the planet? And that was venture capital. And so I looked into venture capital. I had people, friends in the business. I started asking about it and looking at how you can be successful there. And so I came back to him. I said, philanthropically, I want to work with kids and I want to help them be resilient in their consciousness, lower what is called ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences. And for the for-profit side of things, I want to work like this. And he said, great, let's do it. And I did it for 12, 13, 14 years, something like that.
That has got to be the most thoughtful path into venture capital I've ever heard.
Right?
That you're already thinking about raising the consciousness of the world, fixing the environment from the capitalist perspective.
Yeah, it was more about like, what's the right tool for the job? Oh, okay, since you have money, let's see if I can get the tool for the job. And venture capital was just the tool for the job. And I made mistakes in venture capital. Like there was a couple pieces that I missed. We had some great successes. But it was that learning experience is actually, I think, one of the things that informs my coaching more than anything else. It wasn't the 7 years of sitting and meditating in a room and doing all that exploration. It was having the rubber hit the road of like, how does that make you successful in business? How does that make you as a successful parent? How does that make you successful in your relationships? And that was the critical piece of like, it's not like some esoteric thing. It has to actually serve you and the people around you, or it's worthless. Yeah.
So is this where you develop, because at some point you have to develop, I assume you develop some sort of philosophy where you say, this could actually help other people succeed. Is this what you're seeing as you're a venture capitalist, that you're observing people either succeeding or failing, I guess, like one or the other?
Yeah. The way it worked in my world was that I realized, I was like, okay, so I'd made some investments and my thesis wasn't entirely correct, which was the kind of the mistakes I made. And I said, well, how do I make this work? And the biggest piece of leverage I had was the consciousness of the founders and the CEOs of these companies. And so I started to share the tools that I had learned and that helped them be successful. And we had a lot of success in that. And so they started telling their friends about me. And then all of a sudden, I have more people wanting coaching. And I was like, okay, well, what am I going to do with that? And I said, well, I don't have a lot of time. I've got all this other stuff I'm doing. I'll just do a course and we'll just do 3 or 4 days over a quarter. And that I have the time for that. And then that grew. And then there was more of that. And then it's just like the power of it just created the audience. And, and so the next thing I know, that's what I'm doing for a living. At some point, I was like, this is far more joyful for me and so much more enjoyment than investing. And then at some point, when I transitioned fully into it, it was also more lucrative, which is interesting.
Yeah. Venture capital is not a, man, one of my pet peeves, and I joke about it on this podcast from time to time, is people complain about the job because it's a lovely job. Like it's really not that hard. You get to work with amazing people. You get paid pretty well. Yeah. It's not a job that a lot of people leave. And it seems like you found one of the few things that was maybe more rewarding.
For me, yes, that's right. Yeah, it was exactly. Philanthropy even is another job like that. That is a great job when you see that, I helped create an organization that is now serving, like one of our, all of ours went from serving something like 1,000 people to serving like multi-millions of people across dozens of countries. That's an incredibly fulfilling thing. Yeah. And so I was really surprised I would ever leave it. I was definitely really surprised.
And how do you develop this, your kind of ideas in coaching? Is it, okay, I've figured things out. I've put together different experiences in life, or did you kind of go and say, okay, Tony Robbins sort of famously says he listened to every other guru and every audio tape, and I guess audio tapes at the time, and kind of said, okay, I like that, and put it together. Like, how did you come to put it together?
Three things. The most important thing is my own journey, and I was really fortunate in the fact that I was incredibly rebellious as in my 20s, and I didn't want anybody telling me what to do. And so for me, it was all about self-experimentation. It was like, so I don't care if it's Buddha or Christ or I'm trying to remember that guy's name, or Carl Rogers telling me this thing. what I care about is, does it work? So I would create experiments for myself and run them. I still do it to this day. I am currently doing an experiment about low level anxiety. And so like, I'm just constantly doing these experiments internally. And that was the main thrust of what has happened. And I even teach that way. Like I do, like it's not, you're not going to hear me talk or explain stuff or give advice. It's going to be running experiments, and asking a lot of questions. And so that's even the way that I approach the coaching. But then on top of that, I did do a lot of research. I mean, from, I read non-dual teachers from every tradition. I went into all the religions. I went to all the psychological schools. All is a strong word, but as many as I could find until I got bored. And then at some point, I went around the world looking for people who could have really short conversations that were deeply transformative for people. And I was like, okay, so if whoever can do that, they must have something in common. And so that's where we have this kind of connection course, which you do online with another person. And that's how that got created. I went around the world and I said, okay, so this person, Byron Katie, for example, can have these short conversations that are incredibly potent. There's some salespeople who can like consistently be really potent in their conversations. There was a guy named Case DeBron. So like, who are these people? There's community organizers who could like get a whole bunch of people who disagreed to agree. And I'm like, what do they all have in common? And that's the structure of the connection course, is like, this is the thing they have in common. This is the mindset. And we call it view because it's easy to teach that way, but it's being vulnerable, impartial, full of empathy and wonder. And you think it wouldn't work with sales, but it definitely does. And you think it wouldn't work, say, raising money, but it definitely does. And so we created the course out of that, from seeing all these people who could do it, and asking and talking to them and learning what they did.
And who's Case DeBron in this story?
Okay. So I'd been doing all this meditation, and at some point the search stopped. Whatever that search for that space that I had that 8-second high on went away. And I was going about life. It was pretty happy. And then this guy Case shows up in a business context. And he could sell, as an example, he could sell without almost making a statement. He'd just ask questions. Right. And would just sell these products, that anything he believed in. He couldn't do it if he didn't believe. And he could raise money, and he was just amazing. And unfortunately, he got cancer, and he couldn't get the treatment he wanted to where he lived. So he lived in our house with us for a while, and I got to work with him. And he would also have these transformative conversations with people about their life. And so I got to see what he was doing, and he was full of flaws like all of us, and very human. But he definitely put me on that track of being able to have like these, 10-15 minute extremely potent conversations. And like, I want to say this to the people who are listening. There's somebody out there who's like, yeah, I want to know how to do that. And I want to say, that's not the right approach. The right approach is, I want to understand that in myself. When you understand how you can transform your own life in a short period of time, then you'll transform other people's. But if you look at it like a source of power, like, oh, I could accumulate money, or I can accumulate this power to be able to transform people, you're going to be extremely dangerous, both to yourself and others.
And how does an experiment, what is the difference between that and, asking questions to get to the answer? Why do you use the term experiment?
Because one is actually, I would say two things. One is in more of an intellectual exercise, right? So you're only using the intelligence of your brain and not your whole body. So in Silicon Valley, they have that word grok, right? Which means I understand it, but I don't understand it with my whole body, right? Like, how many people understand that I should exercise, but they don't exercise, which means they don't really understand they should exercise. They just intellectually understand that they can exercise. So it's the same thing. An experiment's going to be a whole body experiment. So for instance, one experiment I had is, every time I thought about a company that I was involved in that I didn't want to be involved in, I would get this sinking pit feeling in my stomach. And so an experiment I ran is, every time I feel that, I'm going to stop whatever I'm doing. I'm going to feel it for 5 minutes and just see how it moves. And that's like, it's a felt experiment. And then I'm going to note through journaling, how do my thoughts about the company change if I sit in the discomfort of the company, as an example.
Yeah.
Right. Or if another experiment is, let's say, something I would do with a lot of people who feel like like they're a victim of their board of directors, like their board of directors is their boss. If they think that, right?
Yeah. Right.
Which is hilarious in my world.
Right.
If they think that, then what happens? An experiment I would run is like, I want you to, in your car commute home, get really angry at your board of directors. And I want you to get angry to the point where you have clarity and you no longer believe the story that you're telling yourself. But you don't get to disbelieve the story through anything besides the movement of anger. And then tell me if you do that 3 times this week, in our next session, tell me how your view of the board of directors has changed.
Right.
Things
And
like
so
that.
and so in that sense, you're harnessing an emotion. Is anger the emotion that is most harnessable, or are there all different emotions that people can sort of?
Oh, yeah, yeah. They're all so with emotions, if you look at it, so the way I look at emotions is that you have, first of all, if I took the emotional center out of your brain, you would cease to make decisions. So it would take you a half an hour to decide what color pen to use. Your IQ would be the same, but it would take you 4 hours to decide where to have lunch. So your whole life would fall apart. So clear decision making isn't based on being logical, because we can't make decisions only on logic, neurologically speaking. It's based on whether you are willing to feel something or not. So if you're too scared to feel like a failure, there's a whole set of solutions that you're not going to get to. If you're scared to feel like somebody's judging you, then there's a whole set of solutions you're not going to get to. If you're like, I can't wait for people to judge me, then you have access to all those solutions in that solution set. And so being able to invite your emotions is important. But the way I look at the emotions is it's like a tube, right? And this is emotion is flowing through it. And let's call that tube anger. And if it's constricted one way, it looks like this. I'm not angry. And if you constrict it another way, it looks like this. That's a really nice dress. And if you constrict it another way, it looks like this. You motherfucker, fuck, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Unconstricted anger is clarity and determination.
Yeah.
It is, no, that's not going to work. I can't do that. I'm not going to put my time and energy into that. This is how I want to do it. And I'm open to figuring out a way that that's going to work for you and for me, and what we might have to modulate. That's unrestricted anger. It's clarity, it's determination. You're not cycling on a decision for 20 minutes, let alone 20 days. Each of our big emotional channels, whether that's sadness or whether that's fear or whether that's excitement, there's a clarified version of it, a non-clarified version of it. And so fear, I said excitement, but fear, the clarified version, is excitement. It's exuberance. The unrestricted version, if you restrict it in some ways, is kind of anxious, and in other ways it's power struggles. Sadness is the same way. Constricted sadness looks a lot more like, it can be depression, though constricted anger can be that as well. But unconstricted, it's joy and gratitude. And so it's not about managing your emotional state. It's about allowing it and getting to fluidity from it and stop resisting it, which seems counterintuitive at first. And then once you feel it, you're like, oh, holy crap, this is amazing.
As people work with you, is there a feeling of, you mentioned the short conversations that people have.
Yeah.
Is it more of a breakthrough process where you kind of say something and someone's like, oh my God, that's been holding me back my whole life, it's fixed? Or is it more of a, you need to work on this for years and it's a, perpetual thing?
Yeah. There's kind of two versions of that. The belief system that anything that's been holding you back for years takes time to solve is not true. It can be solved oftentimes. Oftentimes it's only solved in a moment. However, our evolution never ends, meaning, like, when is an oak tree finished, right? Is it when it's a seedling, or what? It's like every part of that oak tree is like part of its evolution. So to think that there's an end of the path is like thinking my company has enough revenue, we're good, right? It's like, and you might be happy with that. That might be fine, but your company could have more revenue. And it's the same thing. Your evolution can continually go on. However, people do this thing, which I'm constantly challenging, which is, okay, so if I just do X, Y, and Z, then I can be happy. Or if I just do X, Y, and Z, then I can find myself motivated or having purpose. All that's just absolute bullshit. That is part of the problem that holds it in place.
Right. And so how do people come to you? So in the world of who you could coach, is it largely executives in Silicon Valley as a practical matter?
I only coach 12 people.
Okay.
And and they're in like a yearly cohort, and then they can sign up for the next year. So I don't do any more than 12. And the rest of my time is on the kind of the online courses. And those 12, the way that they find me is through references. Somebody refers them. And I have a week-long intensive that's really hardcore. And I have a session with them. If it's a match, I invite them to that week. If it's a match there, then they can be on the waiting list to get into the 12-person thing. And it's all word of mouth. And and then the group of 12, I don't do like only high end. I have some, heads of unicorn companies in Silicon Valley. And I have like, C-suite of Fortune, 50 companies. And I try to make sure that there is somebody in the nonprofit world there, somebody who's more in the middle management side of a big company, somebody who's starting their company with 50 people. I try to keep that well-rounded and diverse, because that's how they learn best. Instead of just from everybody else in their position, they get to see the different perspectives, and that is very helpful. So I do a lot more curation than that, but that's one way I curate the group.
And I ask in another sense how they come to you. I guess I think of the state of how they come to you, meaning what you just described. I could see any number of people in Silicon Valley wanting to do that just because that sounds like some kind of cool elite club.
Right. Yeah.
Right now, that sounds like how much money is that going to cost? And the more, the better.
Yeah, that's not happening.
So how do people
until they meet me, until they have a session with me, then they're like, oh shit.
I mean, do people come to you and by the way, I've grown up with this, new age family. Like, do they come to you? It's like, well, this is just kind of some hippy dippy stuff. I want like the keys to the kingdom so I can, knock my board of directors and that kind of thing. Yeah. Like, how do they realize like, oh, this is really a bit of a, I don't know, opening up spiritual, accessing a couple, I shouldn't say that, but accessing a couple things, not the hardcore, how to get ahead in business without really trying kind of thing.
Yeah. So what happens is they come because somebody recommends that they come, generally, right? Somebody says, and they say, okay, I'm going to do this thing because I've seen the change in their life. That's what brings them in.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in our first session, what happens is they think they want X. They have one problem. They think it's X. And we'll look at like 4 or 5 of their problems across different spectrums, like a business problem, a family problem. We'll look at that, and then we'll see how they're all actually the same problem. That, in Ayurvedic medicine, for instance, if you have a problem with your liver, I should see it in your eyes, in your pulse, in your fingernails. Every aspect of your skin should show me the liver problem that you have.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing. So, and once they see it's all connected, and they see that the biggest bang for their buck, like if they can see, oh, wow, my defensiveness, whether it's with my husband or with my executive team, is getting shitty results. If the poverty mentality I hold around time with my family and with my executive team is getting shitty results, and they can see that, and they can see a solution to that, then the resistance dies down, and they're like, okay. But yeah, there's lots of people who are like, wait a second, I thought you were a coach. This feels like spirituality, or this feels like therapy, whatever it is that they don't want to feel. and then they get it, and then they're like, oh shit, I want this, whatever this is. I don't need a name for it anymore.
And why that? I mean, of all the kinds of people in the world, why this type of executive? And maybe the bigger thing is, what do you accomplish? Yes, you're getting paid a ton of money and you're getting a ton of respect. So I guess that's 2 of the game of life, chips you're getting.
Yeah.
But
I had that before. Yeah. That didn't need that. Yeah.
Like, what are you accomplishing by helping people?
Well, there's my joy, which is like I like working with people who are trying to get shit done in the world rather than people just like sitting on a pillow trying to, find their own happiness, which is wonderful. It's just I don't enjoy it as much.
Yeah.
So I really like where the rubber hits the road. I really liked it. Is it tactical, practical? Is it in Buddhist terms, skillful means? So that's one thing. Also, when an executive gets it, then it usually changes the company that they're running. And so you get to see like whole teams become happier. And the way I do my coaching, the reason I only do 12 is because they get first priority in their teams. They can bring their husband and wives to an event that we have and do some of the deep work there. So like it's full support for them because as they transform, if their world doesn't keep up, it's not so good for them or for their world. And so it's really important to me that I can focus on 12 because I get give them the full support. And it's important to me that they're people who are willing to do the work. I don't work with anybody who's not that. And it's really important to me that they're doing cool shit in the world and that they're helping each other do cool shit in the world because it has more of an impact that it gives leverage from my hour into the world. And that's important to me.
Something I've noticed.
And I love business and I've always loved business. And so I love to be able to talk about like how the mergers and acquisition can be changed, not only, by making sure that you have two, as an example, not only by making sure that you have two strategic investors instead of one and how that's going to change your price, but also how you're relating to your strategic investors like your father and listening to the criticism and like all of that is I like being able to do that. It's cool. It's complex.
And do you feel like you now, so you put together your thing, is it you're doing the same thing, it's just people haven't been exposed to it, or is this year you've learned a whole bunch of stuff from last year, so now it's a whole different?
So
how are you growing?
Yeah. So so I did, when we started this, I had 2 days of curriculum. That was like 6 years ago. I think I have 48 days of curriculum now. Wow, because every company has a slightly unique thing that they need when you go in and work with a team. And I continue to do experiments, and then those experiments get shared with other people or in group processes. So it is my own learning that serves the thing. And I get to learn so much because so for instance, I'm more, historically, especially just more type A, more, I use anger more than sadness or showing of hurt, those kinds of things. And so I understand that modality a lot. And through the years, as I do this, I start learning a lot more about the patterns of people who are like tend more towards victim or more towards stuckness or more towards stagnation. And I get to find the hacks, and I love finding the hacks of, oh, wait, you feel depressed. I can give you 3 hacks that in a week will cure low level depression. Like I love finding those hacks. I love and that's really super fun for me because it's like it's my problem solving of like seeing the patterns and the puzzles. And so when I work with people, it looks a little bit like wizardry because it's like, I can say, oh, well, that hump in the back is a critical parent hump that, along with that line in the face says that there's repressed anger. And they're telling me that all these things that they're stuck, that's probably indication of low level depression, which is, and the critical parent. Therefore, these are the 3 hacks that'll help them out.
Wow. That's not something you hear from coaches a lot.
Right.
You usually hear, you need about $40,000 more worth of sessions with me. Is there a thing that people, I like so many people in Silicon Valley who are super successful, they do have some coach, like you kind of realize eventually, but they seem not to really talk about it. Is that a thing where people are kind of trying to pretend like they didn't have help or what?
Right. Yeah. That's a good question. So the people I coach don't seem to have a problem talking about it. Like, I think particularly because I don't want them to talk about the coaching. The thing that I really want them to talk about publicly and that I invite them to talk about is like, what's a transformation that happened in your life? What was your life like before? What was your life like after? So you can set an example to the community of how their happiness and how your happiness, your journey can actually transform your business so that people do that. So that's what I care that because there's not enough stories out there in my world where it's like, he was really successful because of the way he signed the deal with IBM to keep the
Right.
operating system, instead of he was really successful because he realized that, um, for instance, really successful because he realized that emotionally he was locked down and was making bad decisions, and then realized, like, I want those stories out there. And so do they, because once you feel it, you want everybody to have it.
Yeah.
So, but I think with the rest of them, I think that there's this idea of a projection of strength that's seems to be really important in a lot of aspects of business still to this day. And there's some really cool truth to a projection of strength, but it often gets conflated with like emotional constriction, emotional control, or a lack of vulnerability. And
Yeah.
vulnerability has got incredible strength and power to it if you know how and when to use vulnerability. And there is a time when you're in a, where there's just deep combat going on with a competitor, where vulnerability is not appropriate. But if you can't then go to your team and say, be vulnerable, this is the problem and I don't know how to fix it, well, then you're just going to be kind of a screwed CEO.
Right.
You're
Right.
going to be a CEO. Specifically, you're going to be a CEO who's sitting there one day and your company might be worth a couple $1 billion, but you're going to find out that, like, all of your executives have 1 year left and they're ready to quit.
Right. Right.
So you want to be able to have access to both.
I want to wrap up asking a little bit about the course, the online course piece of this. But first, I was told to ask you about the hot seat. Is that something I need to know about? What the hell is a
Yes.
hot seat? There's a 50-50 chance I'm getting punked, or it's a great question.
He's punking me.
Oh.
That must have been a Josh or a Raj saying
Yeah,
that.
that's right.
Yeah. So the week long that I have executives go through to see if it's a good match for coaching, the first and least intense, it's very intense, it's like a Navy SEALs kind of thing of emotional and psychological growth. And so the first experience is you're going to sit. I probably this is not good sales, because usually you hear this after you've had a session with me and you're like, holy crap, okay,
Yeah.
whatever this is, I'll sign up for that.
Right.
But you'll sit in front of a mirror, you'll tell yourself you love yourself for 10 minutes, and then you will narrate out loud everything that your voice in your head is telling you as to why you can't love yourself. And it's a way to extract your limiting thoughts. It's a way to show you what are the thoughts that you're having that actually might be holding you back. And the entire week is about changing your relationship to the critical voice in your head. That's the least intense
Wow.
of 7 days of work. The most intense is the hot seat. And I can't tell you about it because it would destroy the experience for people who went through it.
Oh man.
But yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. So wrap up a little bit.
Josh.
Yeah. So tens of thousands of people listen to this podcast, and 12 at a time, they're not all going to your thing.
Yeah, that's right.
So is the online piece, of you kind of
that's why
to reach more people
piece. That's right. Yeah.
And so how does that work? How would that experience differ? I guess they don't get you and one-on-one.
Yeah. So what happens, there's two ways to do it. One of them is a course of a cohort of 2, and sometimes we do them where you can do bigger cohorts. But it's the connection course, and so that's something that you can do. And it's like watching a movie. It's like watching like 5 movies in a row is basically, and you just press play and you do this series of exercises with somebody, and it's very interactional. It's interactive, it's experimental, it's fun. And that's one way that's not very expensive. And then the next one is the AOA course, the Art of Accomplishment Master course. And it's like 8 hours a week for 2 months. And that's a way that people can interact with me. That only happens once a year. It's all the time I have for it. It's like $6,000 a seat last year. And in that one, you'll get moments with me where it's you get a really super intense pointed like session where that's like, but there's also experiments that you're running with people and a whole bunch of stuff. And it's been great. I didn't think it was going to translate so well to the online world, but we got a 98% completion rate, which is crazy. And then when we asked everybody at the end of it, on a 1 to 10, would you recommend it to your friends? Our average response was like 9.78 or something like that.
Wow.
So it was really, really good. And it's sticky because of the interactions that you're having in the experiment.
You didn't get one guy that gave you like a 1 because like his computer didn't work or something?
I had one guy who gave me an 8. That was the worst thing.
1 star, no parking.
Yeah. I'm sure this isn't going to last, but it gives you an idea of the quality of it. Yeah.
So as you look to the future, and we'll give people the website in a second, but as you look to the future, what are you optimistic about and what you're doing? I mean, you're touching a lot of people. You got the world as it is. You got Silicon Valley as it is. What do you kind of look at when you look to the future?
You know, I used to think that way. I used to think about like, how do I have the biggest scale? How do I touch the most people? How do I have an impact? There's some hubris to that I don't really fall for anymore. It's really about just like, what's the life I enjoy living? And the thing I get off most in like, the kind of thing I get off most on in my work is that like I see somebody that I worked with and I don't recognize them, not because I don't recognize their face, but because their face has changed so much. Yeah. They call it like a Joe Hudson facelift because as the emotions like free, that the constriction of the face changes. Wow. That kind of thing, or watching somebody like who I have never met come up to me at a party and say, oh my goodness, like this is how my life's changed. You're Joe Hudson. Like that just gets me off. Like that's what really gets me off. And my hope is not so much, I mean, great, I'll grow my business as much as is enjoyable. And that sounds really fun. I love growing my business. But what I really hope is that other people innovate in the space and use my stuff to inform their stuff, and that like the ecosystem grows. Right. The ecosystem of what I would call like applied psychology, applied spirituality, applied meditation, like where you're really like interacting. That's what I really want to see happen. And I used to have the idea of like, how do I make that all happen? And now it's like, how do I enjoy myself while rowing the boat in the right direction?
Right. Yeah. So how do people who aren't the 12, by the way, that's where you get the guru thing, right? 12 people. Yeah. You make it 11 or 14, 12 people is a little.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. Shit. So the people who aren't part of this 12, but who are listening to this and say, hey, I want to access that class, where do they do that? Is it?
Yeah, artofaccomplishment.com.
Okay.
You can get free content from Art of Accomplishment podcast. You can do the courses at artofaccomplishment.com. Those are the best ways to access.
We'll put those all in the notes for the show.
Thank you.
One last thing. How did I assume I know the answer to this, but how did the trip to third world countries go? Did you end up getting married? Did you pass the
Yes, we got married. We got married, but we got really close to not getting married. we learned a lot about ourselves on that.
Oof. That's good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it.
What a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. This has been the Something About Your podcast. Joe Hudson, my guest. Talk to you next time.